Picture this. December 1964. The Pacific Northwest is blanketed in snow. Children are counting down the days until Christmas, pressing their noses against frosted windows, dreaming of presents under the tree. Families are making plans, wrapping gifts, preparing turkeys. It looks like it might be the perfect white Christmas. Nobody could have guessed what was coming. Nobody could have imagined that within days, an area the size of France would be underwater. That 47 people would never see another Christmas morning. That entire towns would be erased from the map, never to return. This was not just a flood. This was the Christmas flood of 1964. And for those who lived through it, nothing would ever be the same. It started quietly enough. In the first 2 weeks of December, a brutal cold snap gripped Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Temperatures plummeted, and snow piled up in the mountains, 3 to 4 feet deep. The ground froze solid. Families bundled up by their fireplaces, listening to Christmas carols on the radio, grateful for the festive weather. Doug Robertson was a University of Oregon student, excited to get home for Christmas break. The snow had been falling for days. Everything felt magical. Then something strange happened. The weather changed, and it changed fast. On December 19th, warm winds swept in from the Pacific. Meteorologists called it a Pineapple Express, a massive storm system 500 miles wide, stretching from near Hawaii all the way to the coast. Within hours, temperatures in the valleys shot up to 60 degrees. You could walk around in a t-shirt. And then the rain came. Not a gentle winter drizzle. Torrential, unrelenting rain. 15 inches in 24 hours in some places. 30 inches in a single week near the Eel River. At Crater Lake, where December usually brought 12 inches of rainfall, they recorded 38 inches. More than 3 times the normal amount. All that rain fell on frozen ground that could not absorb a drop. It poured onto 3 feet of mountain snow that melted instantly, adding billions of gallons more. Every stream, every creek, every river began to rise. And rise, and rise. By December 21st, rivers across the Pacific Northwest were spilling over their banks. The Eel River in Northern California, usually narrow enough to throw a baseball across, transformed into a raging monster 5 miles wide. In Miranda, the water rose 46 feet above normal. Signs were later placed on tall poles, just to mark how impossibly high the water had climbed. At Klamath, the entire town disappeared under 15 feet of churning brown water. The Willamette River in Oregon crested 12 feet above flood stage in Portland, lapping at the very top of the downtown seawall. By Christmas Eve, every single river in Oregon was above flood stage. More than 30 major bridges were impassable. Roads had vanished. Railways were buried under mudslides. Whole communities were cut off from the outside world. The Bellamy family lived on Fielder Lane along the Rogue River near Grants Pass, Oregon. Skeets and Bobby and their 3 sons had moved there from Los Angeles in 1959, seeking a quieter life. They had survived a minor flood in 1962. They just moved everything upstairs and waited it out. But nothing prepared them for what happened on the morning of December 23rd. 10-year-old Mike Bellamy was worried about his baseball cards and marbles. His older brother Dan was stranded in town, working at the grocery store on Christmas break from college. As the river crested, a massive tree came hurtling downstream and smashed into their home, obliterating most of it. 19 feet of water filled what remained. The family lost everything they owned. Mike would later recall that years later, you look for things you had and you know they went down the river. But somehow, they still had Christmas. Dan got a rowboat, and he and his brothers paddled through the floodwaters to what was left of their home. They made it to the upper floors. They managed to save some of their presents. Not many, but some. In Kaiser, Oregon, 13-year-old Faith Ehrlich huddled with her family in the chilly State Fair 4-H building, refugees from the rising Willamette. She held her shivering dog Toby close. Around them, dozens of other families had gathered, clutching what little they had managed to grab before fleeing. Faith told a reporter that it was not very fun. Instead of having a snowy Christmas, we are having a watery Christmas. Nearby, a young mother named Mrs. John McAndrew had arrived with her 5 children. Her husband was stranded in Bend and could not get home. A sheriff's deputy had rescued them as the water lapped over their front porch. The building was cold. There were no blankets, but they were alive. In Ferndale, California, 12-year-old Kathy Hayes and her family were trapped in a Victorian house as the water rose floor by floor. Neighbors had come to seek shelter, and together they kept climbing higher, moving furniture, moving children, moving hope upward as the flood chased them. It is funny how people come together in times of need and do extraordinary things, she later wrote. When rescuers finally reached them and brought them to dry ground, strangers in the community donated clothes and Christmas gifts. People they had never even met. Families helping families. Neighbors saving neighbors. The true meaning of Christmas emerging from the chaos. But not everyone was so fortunate. The floodwaters took lives. 47 people died across the Pacific Northwest, 17 in Oregon, 19 in Northern California. Some were swept away in their cars trying to cross flooded roads. Others were trapped in homes that collapsed around them. The Eel River alone claimed dozens of lives and countless animals. Livestock that could not escape drowned where they stood. Horses, cattle, sheep, 4,000 head lost in the churning water. Some bodies were never recovered. Others washed up on beaches miles away or were found tangled in debris weeks later. The most heartbreaking story happened on December 22nd. A Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched to help with rescues near Humboldt Bay. The crew consisted of Lieutenant Commander Donald Prince, Petty Officer James Ninninger, and a Canadian exchange pilot named Alan Altree. A local man named Bud Hansen volunteered to join them to help spot survivors and navigate the unfamiliar terrain. Throughout the day, they pulled people from rooftops in flooded homes. 10 lives saved. As evening fell and conditions worsened, they made one last rescue, plucking a mother named Betty Kemp, her 20-month-old daughter Melanie, and another woman named Marie Bonson from the rising water. They turned back toward the airport, but fog and rain had closed in. A power outage had disabled the navigation beacon. In the blinding storm, disoriented and running low on fuel, the helicopter never made it. 3 days later, a Navy helicopter from the aircraft carrier USS Bennington spotted the wreckage on a remote hillside. All 7 were dead. The 3 crewmen, the volunteer, and the 3 people they had just rescued, including that 20-month-old baby girl. They had given their lives trying to save others. Every December since, the Coast Guard holds a memorial service to honor them, to remember their sacrifice. Entire towns ceased to exist. Wyatt, Myers Flat, Pepperwood, Shively, Stafford, South Fork, Ty Bar, and the town of Klamath were completely destroyed. Some would eventually be rebuilt on higher ground. Others would never return. The Pacific Lumber Company sawmill at Scotia lost 40 million board feet of logs when the water breached their log pond, sending thousands of old-growth redwoods barreling downstream like battering rams. Those logs smashed into bridges, demolished buildings, and destroyed everything in their path. The Northwestern Pacific Railroad lost 37 miles of track. Highway 101 became impassable for months. Communities were cut off from the rest of civilization, stranded islands in a sea of brown water. 16 major highway bridges were destroyed. Countless smaller ones washed away. $100 million in damage occurred in Humboldt County alone. Across the entire region, the toll would reach $540 million. the equivalent of nearly $4 billion today. The military mobilized like it was going to war. The aircraft carrier USS Bennington sailed from San Diego, its deck loaded with helicopters. Navy and Air Force planes flew in from across the country. The destroyer escort USS Walton delivered supplies to isolated coastal towns. Pilots flew through impossible conditions, fog so thick you could not see the rotors above your head, and winds that shook the aircraft like toys. They dropped food, medicine, and water to families stranded for days without help. One radio call that came through to the Rescue Coordination Center was so full of profanity, the coordinator would not repeat it, but the message was clear. Keep the politicians on the ground in Eureka. Send us milk for kids and medicine. People were desperate. People were dying. And the rescuers risked everything to reach them. But it was not just the military that saved lives. It was neighbors, friends, strangers. When the water rose, communities came together in ways that still bring tears to the eyes of those who remember. A young man in hip boots spent Christmas Eve rushing from house to house in Palma Calle, helping residents carry their belongings to waiting trucks. He did not stop long enough to give his name. In small towns across Oregon and California, churches and grange halls opened their doors to the displaced. The Red Cross set up shelters. Volunteers worked around the clock making sandwiches, serving coffee, and handing out blankets. San Quentin Prison sent 4,000 inmates to help with the cleanup. Construction workers from across the country dropped their jobs and drove to the flooded regions. Hay was flown in from as far away as Georgia to feed surviving livestock. Total strangers became family overnight. And there was hope, too, even amid the devastation. In the aftermath of the flood, as log jams washed back to shore and clogged Crescent City Harbor, fishermen spotted movement among the debris. They carefully made their way out and discovered an Angus steer, barely alive, clinging to a pile of driftwood. His name was Bahamas, and he had been raised from a weak little calf by a 15-year-old boy named Brad Hale at a ranch in Klamath Glen. The flood had swept him 2 miles out to sea, but somehow he had survived, grappling atop the debris, refusing to die. The town adopted him as a symbol. Newspaper headlines called him Captain Courageous and the Bullish Miracle. Bahamas lived almost 2 decades after the flood, pampered and celebrated. A reminder that survival was possible even when everything seemed lost. One official report from 1965 tried to capture what those days had meant. The numbers did not tell the whole story, the report admitted. Floods affect people. Once again during the Christmas season, it was the people who were challenged and tested. The report noted that in many places, there were more sandbags filled than stockings, and the lights were on the levees, not on the trees. That image stays with you. Families who should have been gathered around fireplaces, opening presents, were instead knee-deep in mud, filling bags with sand, desperately trying to hold back the water. Children who should have been playing with new toys were instead huddled in cold gymnasiums, wondering when they could go home. Some would never go home. There was no home left to return to. In Albany, Oregon, a 14-year-old boy found himself stranded on his family's farm throughout his entire Christmas vacation. The road was underwater. There was no way out. His family survived on meat from the freezer and canned vegetables from the previous season's harvest. They were luckier than most. They still had Christmas, still had each other. But the isolation was maddening. The waiting, the uncertainty. Looking out the window at a lake that had risen to within 20 feet of the house, wondering if tomorrow it would come closer. That boy would remember those days for the rest of his life. As January arrived and the rain finally eased, the rivers slowly began to retreat into their banks. But what they left behind was devastation. Houses off their foundations, lying on their sides like discarded toys. Cars buried in mud up to their windshields. Trees stripped of bark, lying in rows as if some giant hand had pushed them all the same direction. The smell of rotting livestock and sewage hung in the air for weeks. In some areas, people salvaging debris along the bottoms were bitten by rattlesnakes that had been washed out of the mountains along with the trees. Recovery would take years. Some communities would never fully recover. The dreams of young couples who had pooled their life savings to open fishing lodges or start farms were swept away in a single night, never to return. But here is what those who lived through it remember most. Not just the terror, not just the loss, but the way people came together. The selfless volunteerism. Law enforcement officers, Coast Guard crews, Red Cross workers, ordinary citizens who risked their own lives to save strangers. One survivor put it simply: those of us that survived owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. Years later, telling his grandchildren about rural America, another man said, "The community came together. I had no clothes. My father-in-law made a phone call, and they opened the store and gave me clothes on credit." That is what people remember. Not the flood itself, but the humanity that rose up to meet it. California Governor Pat Brown called it a flood that could happen only once in 1,000 years. They called it the 1,000-year flood. But the truth is, nature does not keep a calendar. Rivers do not care about statistics. Those high water marks still stand along Highway 101, orange and green signs on tall poles, reminding everyone who drives past of how high the water rose in December 1964. Stop at Humboldt Redwood State Park and look up at those markers. You can barely believe it. The water was there, in the forest, in the redwood groves, swallowing everything in its path. The Christmas flood of 1964 changed the Pacific Northwest forever. It changed laws. It changed building codes. It led to the construction of new dams and flood control systems. But more than anything, it changed the people who lived through it. It taught them that everything you have can be swept away in a single night. That the only thing that truly matters is the people around you. That community is not just a word, it is a lifeline when the water rises and the world falls apart. 60 years later, those who survived still carry the memories. The sound of the rain that would not stop. The rumble of water so powerful you could feel it in your bones. The cold of evacuation centers. The kindness of strangers. The faces of those who did not make it. One witness remembered seeing the Eel River from a rescue helicopter. Usually the eel is narrow enough to throw a baseball across. It lay below them now, a 5-mile swath of river, 5 miles wide. A monster born from rain and snow and frozen ground, reshaping the land, rewriting lives. If you were there, you remember. If someone you loved was there, you have heard the stories. The Christmas flood of 1964 was not just a natural disaster. It was a lesson in what matters most. Not the presents under the tree, not the turkey on the table, but the people beside you, the neighbors who check on you, the strangers who become family when everything falls apart. Christmas of 1964 should have been a time of joy. Instead, it became a season of survival, of loss, of heartbreak, but also of heroism, of sacrifice, of communities pulling together when it would have been easier to give up. The pilots who flew through impossible conditions to save lives. The volunteers who worked until they collapsed. The families who opened their homes to strangers. The 14-year-old girl hugging her dog in a cold shelter, making the best of a watery Christmas. They remind us what America is supposed to be. Not perfect, never perfect, but determined, resilient, together. If these stories brought back memories, share them with someone who remembers. Subscribe to keep these American stories alive. Drop a comment and tell us your memories of the Christmas flood, or any flood that changed your life. Those stories matter. They connect us. They remind us that we have survived hard times before and we can survive them again. Until next time, hold your loved ones close. They are worth more than any present under any tree.